Chapter 15. One last job. Telling Helen I wouldn't be coming home had its downsides. I was supporting her and Luke the whole time I was in Iraq, paying the mortgage and the bills, which is what I should have done as a father. When she found a new fella, I was genuinely pleased for her. We were both entitled to new lives, and I wanted us both to be happy. However, I phoned Luke once and he addressed me as Matt. I said, "Luke, this isn't Matt, this is your daddy." Luke couldn't compute what I was saying, and it convinced me that being in his life would be more confusing and damaging than not being. After 2004, I didn't see Luke and barely spoke to him for 7 years. In 2006, I managed to get a divorce after a long, torturous process. It happens to so many people in the military. Women can fall in love with the uniform, with a macho man of war, and the apparent glamour. But there isn't much glamour in being a soldier's wife. Their husbands are away for long periods during which they have to bring up the kids on their own and maintain the home on not a lot of money. You might be with someone for 10 years and then come out of the military and you suddenly discover that you don't actually like each other. It can quickly curdle into a very resentful relationship, and before you know it, it's fallen on its arse. Or you might have discovered that while you were still in the military and thought it was too much hassle to split up, because you'd be heading back to work soon anyway. In moments of clarity, I'd think, is this my life? Is this how it's always going to be? But it's like confronting a cliff face, looming high above. You feel trapped and helpless. It was already on the cards to move to Australia with Nat, but the divorce made it a given. Nat was studying psychology, so had a lot of patience with what was going on in my life. She was an angel, the perfect girlfriend, but I wasn't a good boyfriend for long. I get off the plane at Brisbane shitface, and that would be me for the next 6 weeks. I hated myself, and it pains me now to think of the person I was. Not only was I drinking heavily, I was hooked on Valium and had started injecting steroids. What a lethal combination. And when my leave was up, I couldn't wait to get back to Baghdad. Looking back, I can only imagine that Nat couldn't wait to see the back of me, although she insisted that wasn't the case. Whereas once I'd been a happy drunk, now I was a nasty drunk. I was never one of those soldiers who liked fighting down a pub, but I wasn't able to drink continuously in the military. Now, I'd pick arguments and be verbally aggressive. It wasn't a pretty sight. It reached a point where Nat felt uncomfortable drinking with me because she knew I would turn. It was horrible for her, and it was horrible for me. The drink was controlling me. It had become my life. Nat did eventually manage to get me off Valium. I came home on leave one time, was searching for my tablets, and she flushed them down the toilet. It took a horrible few weeks of cold turkey, but with Nat's support, I did it. Nat was my world. I wouldn't socialise with mates while on leave, partly because I was in a strange land, partly because I couldn't be doing with people from the normal world. So I'd do everything with her, and she was undoubtedly a great woman. However, looking back, I can see I was depressed, dependent, and in a world of extreme turmoil. But there was no chance of me speaking to anyone about it. If anyone had suggested I was depressed, I would have told them not to be so stupid. On the surface, my life was brilliant. I was earning loads of money. I had a beautiful house in Australia, a beautiful girlfriend, but my life at home with Nat was as chaotic as my life in Baghdad. There was no safe haven to run to. I couldn't even stay out of trouble during my occasional getaways to Dubai. Being in Dubai was a massive release, somewhere I could really let my hair down before returning to Australia after a stint in Baghdad. But one night, I was in a hotel bar when a fight kicked off between some Westerners and some locals. I jumped in to try and separate them and got coshed over the back of the head. When I came round, the first thing I saw was my hands in cuffs and my white t-shirt drenched in blood. I looked up to see 2 Arabs in the front seats, before seeing 2 Arabs on either side of me. I thought I was back in Iraq, and I honestly thought they were taking me away to get my head chopped off. I started thinking about how to get out of the situation, put the cuffs over the driver's head and strangle him, elbow the other 2 in the neck before realising I was actually in a cop car in Dubai. They took me to the hospital, and after they tested my blood for alcohol and I'd been checked out, I thought they'd let me go. Instead, they took me to the police station. I was going mental, trying to fight them, telling them to fuck off and that I had to catch a flight in hours. But they were having none of it. They threw me in a cell, and when I looked round, it was full of Arabs. As it turned out, they looked after me, but I still missed my flight. I was given one phone call, so rang Nat in Australia and told her what had happened. She managed to get in touch with the Australian Foreign Ministry, who tried to get involved. The following day, I was frog marched to my 5-star hotel room. I had to walk through the foyer with blood-matted hair and wearing my ripped and bloody t-shirt and handcuffs so that I could give them my passport. When I opened the safe, there was my passport, a big wad of dollars and a bag of diamonds. Why not? Diamond dealing had done so well the first time. They pocketed my passport, took me back to the cells, and eventually let me out later that day. But when I asked for my passport back, they said, "Not possible. You've got to go to court." "What do you mean? I have to go home. Where am I going to stay?" "Not our problem." Later that day, Nat arrived in Dubai. She had no idea I'd been released until she saw me waiting in arrivals. Because I had no idea how long I'd have to stay, I'd booked the cheapest room at the Jumeirah Beach Hotel. But when I arrived, the woman behind the reception said, "Mr. Ollerton, would you please follow me?" We didn't know what the hell was going on. We followed her to this beautiful private reception area, where someone else said to me, "Sir, we'd like to upgrade you to the presidential suite." I turned to Nat and said, "I don't know what the hell is happening, but let's just roll with it." So that's where we stayed, for the same price as the cheap room. The presidential suite was everything you'd expect it to be. They delivered popcorn to go with the films we were watching, champagne, fruit platters, anything we wanted. And a lot of things we didn't. To this day, I don't know why that happened, but it was yet another one of those silver linings. The next day I went to court and managed to see the judge. I asked him how long it would take for my case to come up, and he said it might take 2 or 3 months. Internally, I went into a flat spin, picturing the time stretching out before me. Externally, tried to remain calm. I pulled out a wad of cash and said, "Is there another way?" "Of course, there's always another way, my friend. You give me $600 fine, and I'll give you your passport back, and you can go home." So that was that. Not that we went home immediately. We stayed in the presidential suite for 4 more nights and also managed to get Nat an upgrade to join me in business class on our flight home. It turned out to be one of the best holidays I've ever had. As good as the money was in Iraq, I knew it could all end in a heartbeat. And I had no problem getting rid of the money I was earning. That created a lot of anxiety. There was work to be done in Baghdad, but the downtime was awful. There were even moments when being dead seemed like a lot more comfortable than being alive. I never tried to take my own life, and I don't know how close I came to attempting it, but just the fact I was thinking about it was concerning, especially given that I'd visualized so much that had happened in my life. It seemed that suicide would make life simpler for me and everyone around me. I didn't want to be a burden, so I thought maybe I'd drink a bottle of whiskey, take a load of pills, quietly pass away and bring the mayhem to an end. In the end, Nat had enough of me. I came home one Christmas and some furniture had been cleared from the house. My mum was coming to Australia, and the bed she was supposed to be sleeping in and the table we were supposed to be eating Christmas dinner on were gone. I don't think Nat did it out of spite. I think she was probably instructed by her friends or family to salvage something from a failed relationship. But Nat was a full-time student, and I paid for everything in that house, so I went into a rage beyond belief. But I never stayed upset for long when a relationship ended. I just switched off. I was always able to say, "Right, that wasn't meant to be, let's move on." I don't know if that's the military thing of having to lock bad things away and march on, but it's not necessarily a good way to be. The day after Nat confirmed it was over, I was invited to a baby shower on the Gold Coast. I thought, fuck it, I'll go and have some fun. You meet a lot of women at baby showers. I always had to have a woman in my life, to the extent that I'd almost always make sure there was an overlap. The thought of being alone scared me, and I was already one day overdue. I got on the beers big time and met a girl who happened to have exactly the same birthday as me. Sucker that I was, I thought, wow, this is obviously meant to be. She's been sent for you. Kelly was another Aussie, but lived in the States. So the day after spending the night together, we flew to San Francisco. I didn't hang about in those days. Christmas arrived, my mum came over to Australia, all prepared to console me after my recent breakup, and suddenly I had this new girlfriend. Her reaction? For fuck's sake. My mum tells me now that for years she didn't know me. I was careful not to tell her too much, but she knew enough to know I wasn't right. I kept telling her how wonderful life in Australia was, but she knew that wasn't the case. That Christmas was a nightmare for my poor mum. I was constantly drunk to the extent I couldn't have a normal conversation. I'd be placid one second and flaring up the next. My mum thought I was suffering from PTSD and advised me to seek help, but I didn't want to hear it. She honestly thought I was going to end up dead. I'd get irritated and tell her she worried too much, but of course she worried. She was my mum. Because I was still on a temporary visa, I thought I was going to lose my house. I needed a wife, an Australian one. So I proposed to Kelly and she said yes. We got married in a chapel on top of a mountain in Las Vegas. And the plan for her was to leave San Francisco and return to Australia to live with me. But I knew deep inside what I was doing was very, very wrong. I was having brutal anxiety attacks. My whole body would be numb and shaking uncontrollably, and my head would feel like it was going to explode. I actually thought I was going mad, which was terrifying. I seriously thought I was either going to die or end up in a mental hospital. The only way to nullify the anxiety was by drinking. So I was drinking all the time. Anyone with any sense would have said, Jesus, this bloke's not right. He's just split up with his girlfriend. He's drinking like a fish and a mental wreck. Maybe I should let him sort himself out before even thinking about marrying him. Then again, as long as I had a drink, I always managed to do a decent job of seeming happy. So I have to take a lot of the blame. I'd fucked up big time. Kelly gave up everything to be with me in Australia, and all I wanted to do was get out of the relationship. That's when I started thinking a lot about ending it all. One day I called Nat and told her I'd done something really stupid, that I had nowhere to turn, and that my life was fucked. She told me there was a way out of everything and what I needed to do. Nat had no reason to help me, but she did, and I'll never forget it. She was such an important figure in my life. Kelly was understandably distraught when I told her it had all been a mistake. She thought she was in this movie romance, but I wasn't the least bit interested. I got myself a Vegas lawyer and got the marriage annulled, a la Britney Spears. And that's when I decided I really needed to leave Iraq. But there was one last gig, and there always is, at least in the movies. And it was very nearly the end of me. I took another job working as a personal security detail, part of a 4-man expat security team, and we'd taken a VIP to a villa for a meeting. While the VIP was inside and we were resting up, the compound came under attack. We were used to the sound of gunfire, but when the rounds started coming through the gate and a couple of local security guards got shot, we realised the villa and perhaps the VIP was the focus. We took cover, and when I looked up, I could see that a group of enemy soldiers had taken up positions behind our vehicles, while others were in nearby buildings. We were in danger of getting trapped at the back of the compound, and I could feel the situation spiralling out of control. We were already outnumbered, and I knew that we had to act very quickly before reinforcements arrived, which they surely would. Rounds were fizzing past my head and hitting the wall behind us, but I managed to scramble to my feet, open fire, and hit one guy who went down in a heap. And once the enemy started going down, they stopped coming forward. That gave us the breathing space we needed to be able to do what we needed to do. Amid the mayhem, I somehow managed to formulate a short-term, immediate action. The first thing you do when you enter a compound is check the floor plan and ascertain your exit routes, besides the main one. The main one was taken by the enemy, but I knew there was one at the rear if we could trick our attackers. Shaping to move towards the exit on the left-hand side would encourage them to focus their fire on that one spot, allowing us to escape by the other route. So I sent one of our guys over to the false exit and told him to fire sporadically to give the impression that we were all heading that way. The enemy fell for that ruse almost immediately. They changed formation in an attempt to dominate that position, and as soon as they did so, another path to our vehicles opened up. We were then able to get into the villa, bundle the VIP into a car, and make our escape, while there were still bullets whistling past the windows. It all happened in about 15 minutes. None of our guys was hit, and we did the job we were hired to do, which was keep the VIP safe. I think I was the only ex-Special Forces soldier in our team, but the company I was working for only employed ex-military. That being the case, I knew everyone I was working with knew the necessary drills, and that when bullets started coming down, they'd follow orders to the letter. When my colleague was sent to the other side of the compound to draw fire, he did it without asking questions because he understood its importance. Can you imagine asking someone with no military experience to do that? Mate, do you think you could possibly run over there so that they all start shooting at you? You can't plan or practice stuff like that. But when you're as highly trained as I was, solutions come naturally, even in moments of intense pressure. It was because we were all professionals that it all went so smoothly, and we were able to achieve our aim. One wrong action by any single person could have led to us all being killed or having our heads chopped off. I'm sometimes asked, how many people have you killed? It's a question a lot of soldiers get asked and one we all hate. I prefer to look at it a different way. I don't know if the person I hit in the compound died or not, but if he did, how many people did I save by killing that one person? How many people did I save by opening fire on that car in Fallujah? Had I not, 14 people might have died, including me. I didn't squeeze the trigger because I found it fun. I didn't score the possible kills on the butt of my gun. They could have killed us, so I had to take action. It was the same as being attacked by the chimp. I was close to death in both cases. A small squeeze of a trigger away in the case of the attack in Fallujah, one more bite away in the case of the chimp attack. They were both break points, and the attack on the compound was another one. But I had enough of dicing with death by that point. That was the universe saying, fucking hell, is this dickhead still there? Get out! Chapter 16, False Dawn. Being in a war zone for 6 years had almost destroyed my life. By the end, any good memories I might have had of Baghdad had been obliterated. I finally said goodbye to Iraq in 2008. Our contract hadn't been extended, which forced my hand. But I had already started planning my new life in Australia anyway. I was going to gain some knowledge of the property market, invest in real estate, and that would be my new career. This was the external fix that would make all my problems disappear. I got back with Nat for a bit, split with her again, and was in a new relationship in no time. Although this time it was 2 days overdue. If I'd learned to be on my own, it would have saved so much hassle, so much money, and so much time. It was as if I was trading my girlfriends in. I thought it was that easy. What I didn't understand then, but do now, is that Nat was special and not easily replaced. Sarah had a young son who was the same age as Luke when I left him, which I took as a sign, just as I always thought things were signs when they not always were. Sarah had a drink problem that was worse than mine and beyond anything I'd seen before. I was trying to create a new life for myself away from war zones, find some stability, and I'd found a walking, talking war zone in Brisbane. One night, I was supposed to introduce Sarah to some friends, but before we got to the bar, she was so drunk she could barely talk. I told her I didn't want to be with her and walked away. She didn't come home that night, and the following morning, I got a call from hospital. From what I could make out, she got in a taxi, tried to do a runner, got into a scuffle, fallen over and banged her head. I believe that everyone comes into your life for a reason. Even if they're like Sarah and a terrible match, they hopefully direct you to a place where you're happy and content. But Sarah was a harsh lesson. It hammered it home that just because I had a good girlfriend in Nat, that didn't mean the next one would be the same. There's a lot more to relationships than that. Life away from a war zone wasn't enough for me. Again, I find myself not being fulfilled. I needed something more. But I was about to make a bizarre connection that would change all that. A mate called Denny, who worked with me in Iraq and now lived down the road from me in Brisbane, threw a party, where I met a guy called Simon, who used to be in the intelligence corps and did a lot of work with special forces. It was fancy dress, but I immediately recognised him as one of my interrogators in selection. Not the fat guy who was eating sweets, but the one who was yapping around me like a chihuahua when I first got off the vehicle. Simon told me about an organisation in Australia he had connections with called the Grey Man. The Grey Man was set up for the prevention of child prostitution and slavery, primarily in Southeast Asia. They would send undercover operatives into brothels, identify child prostitutes, and either use local law enforcement to get the kids out or do rescues themselves. Simon thought I could maybe train operatives for them, and I was intrigued. The Grey Man's chief was John Curtis, a former Australian Special Forces commando. John had a team around him that had been operating in Southeast Asia for a number of years. It was all self-funded, but I'd saved some money and wanted to be part of it. I met some people, put together a package and started doing training around Brisbane. It was awesome. I loved it. I wasn't back on the tools, but I was back in a world that I knew and felt like I was doing something worthwhile. They asked me if I wanted to go undercover, but pretending to be a paedophile felt too raw for me. Then I split up with Sarah and I thought, fuck it. I'm going overseas to do what I said I'd never do. Vice, the media company, wanted to film the story in Thailand and make a documentary. So I signed up for a trip. But before heading out, I returned to the UK and saw Luke for the first time since he was 4. He was now 11. And it was incredible to see him as a proper grown-up boy. But it was also like seeing one of my best mates again, as if I'd never been away. There was still a lot of work to do in terms of building the relationship into a proper intimate father and son thing, but it was easier than I thought it would be. For everything I regretted about my relationship with Helen, he was the one bit of goodness that came from it. When I got to Thailand, I was in holiday mode. There was always an excuse to drink. I'd meet someone and have a beer with them. I'd meet someone else and have a beer with them. And when I wasn't drinking, my anxiety would be crippling. My fear and unease verging on panic. We were working with the Thai government's anti-human trafficking department, AHTD, in the tourist resort of Pattaya. The plan was to go into bars, identify kids, and hopefully come away with photos and video. We'd then meet with the AHTD and plan a bust. But after attending my first briefing, I knew it was a crock of shit. We'd built an intelligence picture and covered a wall with photos of underage girls sold into the sex trade. And I noticed one of the AHTD agents taking pictures of the photos with his phone. In my world, you wouldn't be taking pictures. He didn't need to be taking pictures, so it was a concern to me. I didn't say anything, because we were trying to build relationships, but I knew at that point that this was going nowhere. The following night, we went in to do the bust. But the first club we went into, the whole staff had changed, and they all pleaded ignorance. The problem seemed to be so ingrained in the culture, and everything was just so corrupt. We had more busts planned, but I knew they'd be worthless. One day, we were chilling out on the beach with the crew from Vice. Me and Simon warned them not to go out on the jet skis because we knew it was a scam run by the local mafia. Tourists would hire a jet ski, and when they returned it, the company would claim the clutch was blown or the side had been scratched and keep their deposit. Of course, the Vice team didn't listen to me. One of them had a collision with a boat, did a bit of damage, and the beach erupted. We've been trying to keep a low profile, and now we needed to get these people out of there quickly. Me and Simon told the others to get back to the hotel as quickly as possible and get ready to leave, because they'd handed over their passport details and hotel information along with the deposit. Meanwhile, me and Simon tried to reason with the jet ski owner. While that was happening, all these nasty-looking mafia dudes started turning up. We managed to extricate ourselves from the situation, drifted back to the hotel, got everyone into the cars, and as we were driving out of the hotel, the mafia started arriving. We had arranged an emergency RV, which was another hotel called Cabbages and Condoms. Yes, you read that right. When we arrived later that night, having given the mafia the slip, we walked into this hotel and there were condoms everywhere. There was a Father Christmas made out of condoms, condoms hanging from trees, condoms disguised as flowers, and when we left reception, we stumbled upon this perfectly manicured lawn with a spotlight on it, which was covered in little white bunnies hopping all over the place. Moments earlier, we were being chased by the Thai mafia. I felt like Alice, having fallen down a rabbit hole into Wonderland. Once again, it was a hairy story with a silver lining. And lots of condoms. Exactly where the cabbages came into it, I have no idea. We did one more bus that night, but before long, the operation had fallen apart. It became clear that we weren't going to find any solid evidence, and the vice crew said they'd had enough and left. But I was hearing stories about kids being sold to fishermen and raped for days on boats before being killed and thrown overboard. Whether those stories were true or not, there was certainly a thriving trade in child prostitution in Thailand, and I thought there was more we could do. I couldn't help thinking that by the time the kids were in the brothels, it was too late. They were earning money, that money was going back home. They had mobile phones and clothes. So the only way to save kids was to find them before they'd reach the brothels. A guy called Mickey Chusia ran the Ban Yu Suk shelter in Chiang Mai, which provided sanctuary and education to vulnerable girls, as well as a charity, the Children's Organization of Southeast Asia, COSA. There were stories of Mickey carrying kids over the Burmese border while being shot at. It seemed like a proper hero, doing miraculous things, so I thought I'd go up to Chiang Mai and see if I could do anything to help. I took 2 guys with me, a former policeman and a former bodyguard. Met Mickey, and he showed us around the shelter. All the money had been raised through donations, and most of it was used to put the kids through school. It was awesome to see all those vulnerable kids getting an education. Mickey told us about the slave camps dotted along the Thai-Burmese border, and we decided to try to identify the camps and get some kids out. After a couple of days at the shelter, we took off in a pickup. I lay on my back all the way through Thailand. With my bag as a pillow, it was bliss, just staring at the sky, filled with excitement about our mission. We made some connections on the way to the border and gathered some information about the likely whereabouts of these slave camps, which were really just villages. Our focus wasn't to ask why, but just to get the kids out. We ventured up into the foothills, which were extremely dangerous. Before we went up, we had to make a decision about whether to take weapons or not. We decided not to, because if we got stopped by a cartel and we had weapons on us, they would assume we were the Drug Enforcement Agency and there could have been all sorts of trouble. It made more sense to pretend to be tourists. All the same, not having a weapon on me made me feel extremely vulnerable. I'd carried weapons on every operation I'd ever done. They were the tools of my trade. The SBS trained us in disarming skills designed specifically for the military, and I could have a punch-up, but you don't take a pea shooter to a gunfight. If anyone decided to have a pop, we were fucked. The Thai government supplied villages with medical provisions, but everything was so corrupt, so by the time the provisions got to the people, there might be 1 bottle of paracetamol left. So we were trading medical provisions in exchange for information all the way. We were told that one guy would be able to tell us about a village where loads of kids were kept. But when we reached him, he wanted his whole village supplied with medicine. We did as he asked, and he told us the cartels had been up and interviewed the slave traders, and the plan was for them to return, take the kids away, and distribute them to fishing villages and brothels all over the region. The following day, we went up to the village and found these 22 kids. It was a very tense moment because we knew the cartel could turn up at any moment and that we'd have very limited amount of time to get the kids processed and evacuated to the shelter. Their ages ranged from 8 to 14. One girl told us that when she found out she was going to be trafficked, she'd run to the nearest police station, told them what was happening, only to be taken to the cells and raped for 3 days by the policemen and their mates. Luke was 11 at the time, so it was very harrowing to hear stories like that from kids who are about the same age. It made me extremely angry and very passionate about getting those kids out of that situation. Having processed the kids, we arranged for a team to move them to safe houses over the next few days, before quickly evacuating to another village on the Burmese border. I was on an amazing high that night from believing that I'd done something good. I'd probably changed those kids' lives, saved them from years of prostitution and an early grave. It gave me a real sense of fulfillment, purpose, and belonging. It was like no feeling I'd had before, and I wanted more of it. That night, we arrived at another village and exchanged more medical products for a room and some food. We had a debrief and discussed our plans for the next few days in terms of getting the kids to safety. After a well-deserved meal and a couple of shots of Mekong, we retired to our bamboo huts and hit the hay. I don't know how long I'd been asleep for when I shot up like a bolt. It was dark and I was befuddled. At first, I assumed I'd had a nightmare. Then I heard something going on outside. I peered through the slits in the bamboo and could see armed men arguing with and apparently threatening the villagers. I didn't have to understand Thai to know the armed men were members of a cartel. We were in severe danger. We had organised an emergency RV away from the village, but it was too late. There were torches everywhere, and if I tried to make a run for it, I would have been seen for sure. The alternative was maybe being caught and executed. I drew my knife and hid in the darkest place in the room, behind the door. Had I been hunting for me, it was the first place I would have looked, but it was all I had. The door flew open and nearly hit me in the face. Luckily, it didn't swing back on its hinges, so I remained hidden from view. A man wielding an AK-47 walked into the middle of the room. Sweat was streaming into my eyes and my heart was beating so hard I worried he might be able to hear it. Just as I thought he was going to look behind the door, his mobile phone pinged. He fished it from his pocket and looked at it for a couple of seconds before screeching something in Thai, I assume along the lines of, "Room clear," and marching towards the exit. As he left, he looked to his right, and I felt certain he saw me through the gap in the door. I tightened the grip on my knife, but I never had to use it. The man swept back into the village, and I made the immediate decision to make my escape under the cover of darkness. Two of the guys were waiting for me at the RV, and we soon found Mickey as well. It transpired that the cartels had discovered that Westerners were in the area and suspected we were working for the DEA, exactly the situation we were keenest to avoid. We didn't sleep that night, and at first light, slipped out of the village and headed south for our next mission. The journey to safety seemed to go on forever, and we were terrified that danger lurked around every corner. But eventually, we made it to safety. We'd been tipped off about a bar that was run by a Westerner and renowned for using minors for sex. So three of us, me and two Aussies called Tim and Paul, decided to go in undercover. We thought that if we went in separately and pretended not to know each other, we'd be able to spread our net wider. The brief was to keep a low profile and get as much information as we could, including details about the owner and footage of the rooms upstairs, where sex with children was alleged to take place. It was all going to plan. I'd identified the owner, who was a Cockney, and was minding my own business in the corner of the bar. But I soon got chatting to the owner. One drink turned into a few, which turned into a few more, Before I knew it, I was being introduced to my two mates, and I was part of the gang. By the end of the night, I got involved in a one-arm press-up competition in the middle of the bar. Tim was playing the drums, Paul was on the mic singing karaoke, and we were best mates with everyone. As mad as it sounds, that was the best way to do it. Rather than skulking in the corner, nursing a glass of lemonade, peering over the top of a book, everyone was pissed. So we had to get pissed too. Lemonade? This is a Thai sex bar. We managed to create enough of a smokescreen that Paul was able to get upstairs and look at the rooms, which contained no kids, but did have CCTV connected to a central control room full of TV screens. Then the grey man made a wrong move. While we were still in Thailand, they told the media that we'd just rescued 22 kids from being trafficked. By that time, the grey man had done 140-odd such rescues in Southeast Asia, but to get 22 kids out in one hit was a big deal. The story spread like wildfire, and I think the US State Department got hold of the story, contacted the Thai government and said something along the lines of, "What the hell is going on? We give you millions of dollars a year to prevent the trafficking of children, and we're reading that a four-man team has done more than you've ever done." The Thais immediately went on the defense, which quickly turned into attack. They savaged our credibility. They claimed that the Grey Man was a crooked organisation, conning donors out of money, which was then lining our pockets. They also claimed that the 22 kids hadn't been sold into slavery at all. That story quickly became accepted fact, and suddenly we were being hunted down. We were ignorant of all the controversy, so headed off to do another operation. But had we been seen by the wrong people, we would have been arrested. Shortly afterwards, news reached us that the Thai police were hunting us down and we needed to get out of Dodge, quickly. A disgruntled former Grey Man operative had started working for the AHTD, so we were concerned that he might have passed on our names, and if they caught us and asked for papers, we would have been in the shit. But we managed to escape over the border and into Burma before flying back to Australia. Not long after that, and against my better judgment, I got back together with Sarah. I was staying on the Gold Coast with her family when my phone started pinging with text messages from people telling me to buy a newspaper. The first thing I saw when I walked into the newsagent was a picture of me, my Grey Man colleagues, and the 22 kids we'd rescued on the front page of The Australian. Luckily, our eyes were blacked out. Not so luckily, the story contained more claims that the Grey Man was a bogus charity. And the story wasn't just in The Australian. It was in every major newspaper in the country, as well as being all over the TV news. I immediately knew that the Grey Man would soon be no more. I knew that the majority of the donations went straight to the kids and that none of us took a salary. But the stories claimed that money was being misused. They also claimed that the kids we had rescued were living perfectly normal lives with their families. What else were they going to say to journalists who stuck recorders under their noses? They relied on the Thai authorities for financial and medical support. Everything was being denied at every level. Even other charities waded in, backing up the Thai government's claims. It was devastating on a personal level. I got my teeth into something that really mattered to me, and now it is being rubbished in a very public way. I'd also spent all my savings on the Grey Man, so my whole world dropped away beneath me in a heartbeat. But it was also gut-wrenching to know that with the Grey Man gone, so many kids would suffer as a result. Whatever mistakes John Curtis made, and it was him that came in for most of the flack, I knew his organisation had done a lot of good things for a lot of people. But the culture of child prostitution was just so ingrained, which meant any charity trying to do anything about it was swimming against a very strong tide. You can try to be a superhero, fly in and try to change things, but only the Thais themselves have the power to change their own culture.